Marcus Chen stood quietly in the corner of Murphy's gun emporium, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he examined the display cases. The old man's simple gray uniform bore no decorations, just a small patch reading Arlington Cemetery Honor Guard. His posture remained rigid despite his 73 years, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen too much. The gun shop bustled with its usual Saturday afternoon crowd. Hunters discussed the upcoming season, collectors debated the merits of various firearms, and weekend warriors compared tactical gear. Most ignored the elderly Asian man in the corner, but a group of younger customers had noticed him and found his presence amusing. "Look at Grandpa over there," snickered Brad Hutchins, a stocky man in expensive hunting gear. "Probably thinks he's still in the army or something." His companions laughed, emboldened by the attention their leader was drawing. Marcus continued his quiet examination of a vintage M1 Garand, running his fingers along the woodstock with the reverence of someone who knew the weapon intimately. He had carried one just like it through the jungles of Vietnam half a century ago. But these young men didn't need to know that. "Hey, old-timer," Brad called out, his voice carrying across the shop. "You looking to buy something, or are you just here to remember the good old days?" More laughter erupted from his group. The shop owner, Murphy, looked up from behind the counter with concern. He knew Marcus personally, and respected the quiet dignity the man brought to his weekly visits. "Brad, maybe you should focus on your own business," Murphy suggested diplomatically. "Aw, come on, Murph, I'm just being friendly." Brad swaggered over to Marcus, his friends following like loyal pack animals. "We're curious about our local hero here. Tell us about your service, Gramps. I bet you've got some great stories about standing around all day." Marcus slowly turned to face the younger man. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes caused Brad's smirk to waver slightly. "I guard the tombs of better men than you'll ever be," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume. "Ooh, scary," Brad mocked, recovering his bravado. "What are you going to do, throw flowers at me?" His friends burst into fresh laughter, and even some other customers began to pay attention to the confrontation. The tension in the shop grew thicker as Marcus remained silent. He had faced down enemy soldiers, grieving families, and protesters throughout his long career. A group of weekend warriors posturing in a gun shop barely registered as a threat, but their disrespect for what he represented, the honor and sacrifice of those who had given everything, stirred something deep within him. "You know what your problem is?" Brad continued, warming to his audience. "You old-timers think the world owes you something just because you wore a uniform. Well, newsflash, times have changed. We've got technology now. Drones, smart weapons, satellite surveillance. Your generation's way of doing things is obsolete." Marcus stepped forward slightly, and Brad instinctively took a half-step back. "Technology doesn't replace honor," Marcus said simply. "Or courage. Or the willingness to stand watch while others sleep safely." "Honor?" Brad laughed harshly. "What honor is there in standing around a graveyard all day? At least real soldiers see action. You're just a glorified security guard for dead people who can't even say thank you." The shop fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Even Brad's friends seemed uncomfortable with how far he had pushed things. Murphy moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. Marcus looked at each of the younger men in turn, his gaze settling finally on Brad. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "The dead can't say thank you. That's precisely why they need someone to stand for them, someone to ensure they're never forgotten, someone to represent the values they died protecting." "Values like what?" Brad challenged, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Like the right of ignorant young men to stand in gun shops and speak freely without fear," Marcus replied. "Like the freedom to disrespect those who earned that freedom for you. Like the liberty to live your comfortable life without ever understanding what it cost." Brad's face reddened, but before he could respond, the shop's bell chimed as the front door opened. All heads turned toward the entrance, where a figure in military dress uniform stood silhouetted against the afternoon sunlight. The newcomer stepped inside, and the distinctive stars on his shoulders became visible. The man was tall and commanding, with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect and obedience. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of a career military officer. When his gaze fell on Marcus, his entire demeanor changed. "Attention," The general barked, and every person in the shop instinctively straightened. Even Brad, despite his civilian status, found himself standing taller. The general strode across the shop floor, his highly polished shoes clicking against the concrete. As he approached Marcus, he slowed and then came to a complete stop. In one fluid motion, he brought his hand up in a crisp salute. "Sergeant Major," he said formally, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent shop. Marcus returned the salute with equal precision, decades of muscle memory guiding his movements. The sight of the elderly tomb guard saluting with such military bearing sent a ripple of confusion through the gathered customers. This was clearly not the simple cemetery worker they had assumed him to be. "General Morrison," Marcus acknowledged, lowering his hand. Brad and his friends exchanged bewildered glances. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and they found themselves on the outside looking in at something they didn't understand. The man they had been mocking was suddenly the center of respectful attention from someone who clearly outranked anyone they had ever met. "I wasn't expecting to find you here, Sergeant Major," General Morrison said, his formal tone softening slightly, "though I should have known you'd be maintaining your weekly ritual." "Old habits, sir," Marcus replied with the hint of a smile. "And old friends." He nodded toward the M1 Garand he had been examining. The general's eyes followed Marcus's gaze to the rifle, then swept across the shop, taking in the audience that had gathered. His expression hardened as he noticed the uncomfortable expressions on several faces, particularly Brad's group. General Morrison's piercing gaze settled on Brad and his companions, who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the general assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones around the world. "I trust everyone has been treating the Sergeant Major with appropriate respect," the general said, his tone carrying the subtle menace that only career military officers could master. It wasn't quite a question, but it demanded an answer nonetheless. Murphy cleared his throat nervously. "There was a bit of a misunderstanding, General." "Nothing serious, misunderstanding." The general's eyebrows rose slightly. He turned to Marcus. "Sergeant Major, would you care to enlighten me about this misunderstanding?" Marcus remained at attention, his expression unchanged. "Just some young men expressing their opinions about military service, sir. Nothing I haven't heard before." Brad shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his earlier bravado had evaporated completely. The presence of the general had transformed the casual mockery into something that felt dangerously like insubordination, even though he was a civilian. "We were just having a conversation," he mumbled. "A conversation," General Morrison repeated, tasting the words. "How refreshing. It's been my experience that conversations work best when all parties understand who they're talking to." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Tell me, son, what do you know about the tomb of the unknown soldier?" Brad glanced at his friends for support but found none. It's a monument, right? In Arlington Cemetery?" "Indeed." "And do you know who guards that monument? Cemetery workers?" Brad ventured, his confidence continuing to crumble. General Morrison's expression could have frozen water. "Cemetery workers," he repeated slowly. "Sergeant Major Chen, would you be so kind as to educate these gentlemen about the qualifications required for your position?" Marcus relaxed slightly from his formal posture. "The tomb guard is drawn from the 3rd Infantry Regiment, sir. The old guard. Each guard must complete extensive training, maintain perfect military bearing, and pass rigorous physical and mental examinations. We guard the tomb 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in all weather conditions. We have done so without interruption since 1948. And before your assignment to the tomb guard?" the general prompted. 26 years active duty, sir. 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in Lebanon, 3 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Airborne qualified, Ranger qualified. Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster, Distinguished Service Cross. The shop had become so quiet that the sound of a dropped pin would have been deafening. Brad's face had gone pale as he began to understand the magnitude of his error. This wasn't some elderly security guard. This was a decorated combat veteran whose service record read like a history of American military conflicts over the past half-century. Distinguished Service Cross, General Morrison mused. "That's quite impressive, Sergeant Major. Perhaps you could share the circumstances of that particular commendation?" Marcus hesitated. With respect, sir, I'd prefer not to discuss operational details in present company. Of course, security considerations. The general nodded approvingly. Still, I think our civilian friends might benefit from understanding the caliber of individual they've been conversing with. He turned to face Brad directly. The Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest military decoration for valor. It's awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. The citation for Sergeant Major Chen's DSC involves single-handedly holding a position against overwhelming enemy forces to protect the evacuation of wounded civilians. Brad swallowed hard. I didn't know. No, you didn't, the general agreed. But ignorance isn't an excuse for disrespect, particularly when directed at someone who has earned the right to respect through blood and sacrifice. Another customer, an older man who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. General, if I may ask, is this the same Marcus Chen who trained the honor guards for the state funerals of 3 presidents? The very same, General Morrison confirmed. Sergeant Major Chen has personally overseen the ceremonial aspects of more state funerals, military honors, and Medal of Honor ceremonies than any other active duty service member. He has trained over 1,000 honor guards and maintained standards that have never been compromised. The revelation hit the shop like a physical force. Marcus Chen wasn't just a tomb guard. He was the tomb guard, the standard by which all others were measured. He represented an unbroken chain of tradition and honor stretching back generations. But he's just standing there. One of Brad's friends whispered, as if speaking louder would make the situation worse. Just standing there, General Morrison repeated with a humorless smile. Do you have any idea what just standing there entails? The tomb guard walks exactly 21 steps across the tomb, pauses for 21 seconds, then walks 21 steps back. This pattern continues for hours at a time, in temperatures ranging from over 100 degrees in summer to below 0 in winter. Rain, snow, sleet, ice. The guard never leaves his post. Marcus added quietly. During Hurricane Isabel in 2003, we received orders to abandon our posts for safety reasons. The guards refused. We continued the watch throughout the storm. Refused orders? Brad asked, confused. The tomb guard serves at the pleasure of the unknown soldiers, Marcus explained. Our duty to them supersedes personal comfort or safety. We have never missed a change of guard, not once. Not in 75 years. The general nodded approvingly. The sergeant major and his fellow guards embody something that seems to be increasingly rare in modern society. Absolute dedication to duty, regardless of personal cost. They represent the highest ideals of military service. Murphy, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Marcus comes in here every Saturday. Always looks at the same rifles, always handles them with the same respect. Never buys anything, just remembers. The M1 Garand was the standard infantry rifle when I first enlisted, Marcus said simply. It's good to remember where you came from. Brad struggled to find words. The man he had been mocking 20 minutes earlier now towered over him morally and professionally, despite their similar physical heights. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. No, you didn't, Marcus agreed without malice. But understanding isn't required for respect. The soldiers buried in Arlington died defending the right of people like you to speak freely, even when they speak foolishly. That's what makes America worth defending. General Morrison checked his watch. Sergeant Major, I hate to interrupt, but I'm due at the Pentagon in an hour. However, I wanted to personally thank you for your service and let you know that your request for additional security measures at the tomb has been approved. Thank you, sir. Given the current global situation, extra precautions seem prudent. Global situation? Brad asked, his curiosity overcoming his embarrassment. The general and Marcus exchanged a look. Let's just say that not everyone in the world shares America's respect for the honored dead, the general said carefully. Recent intelligence suggests that certain hostile elements view targets like the tomb as symbolically valuable. The implications of his words sent a chill through the room. The idea that foreign enemies might target something as sacred as the tomb of the unknown soldier was almost incomprehensible to most Americans. Which is why, the general continued, the sergeant major's role has expanded beyond ceremonial duties. He now serves as the primary security coordinator for Arlington's most sensitive areas. Marcus remained silent, but his expression suggested there was much more to the story than was being shared in present company. General Morrison's secure phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the display and his expression darkened. Excuse me, this is urgent. He stepped toward the back of the shop and answered in clipped professional tones that carried despite his efforts to speak quietly. Morrison here. When? How many? Understood, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He returned to the group, his demeanor noticeably more tense. Sergeant Major, I'm afraid our timeline has accelerated. We need to implement the new security protocols immediately. Marcus straightened. Sir? Intelligence reports suggest the threat we discussed is no longer theoretical. We have confirmation of foreign operatives conducting surveillance of several high-value targets in the D.C. area. Arlington is on that list. The casual atmosphere in the gun shop evaporated completely. Murphy looked concerned, while Brad and his friends appeared bewildered by the sudden shift from personal embarrassment to national security implications. General, Murphy interjected hesitantly, should civilians be hearing this? Under normal circumstances, no, Morrison replied. But these aren't normal circumstances. The reality is that every American needs to understand what we're facing. He turned to address the entire shop. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to share some classified information with you under the authority granted to me by current threat conditions. What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. The weight of his words settled over everyone present. Even the most casual observers understood they were about to become part of something much larger than a simple shopping trip. 3 weeks ago, NSA intercepted communications between a cell of foreign operatives discussing plans to attack symbolic American targets. The goal isn't mass casualties, it's psychological warfare. They want to strike at the heart of American identity and morale. Brad found his voice. What kind of targets? Monuments, memorials, places that represent American values and history. The tomb of the unknown soldier tops their list because of what it represents. Respect for military sacrifice, national unity, the continuity of American ideals across generations. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his hands had moved to a ready position at his sides. Sir, what's the specific nature of the threat? Intelligence suggests a coordinated attack involving explosives and small arms. Their plan is to overwhelm the standard security measures and desecrate the tomb during a high-profile ceremony. The next Medal of Honor presentation is scheduled for Thursday. The shop fell silent as the implications sank in. An attack on the tomb during a Medal of Honor ceremony would be broadcast live across the nation, making it the perfect platform for psychological warfare. But surely the FBI and Secret Service can handle this, suggested another customer, an elderly woman who had been quietly browsing. Why involve a tomb guard? General Morrison smiled grimly. Because the Sergeant Major isn't just a tomb guard. His current classification is extensive. Marcus, how much can we share? The basics should be sufficient, sir, Marcus replied. For the past 5 years, I've served as the primary tactical advisor for Arlington security operations. My background in special operations and asymmetric warfare makes me uniquely qualified to anticipate and counter unconventional threats. Special operations? Brad asked weakly. Sergeant Major Chen spent 8 years with Army Special Forces before transferring to the Rangers, the general explained. He's conducted classified operations on 4 continents and trained with every major Allied Special Forces unit. His expertise in close-quarters combat and urban warfare is legendary within certain circles, Murphy whistled low. And here I thought you just liked looking at old rifles. I do like looking at old rifles, Marcus said with the hint of a smile. But I also like preventing bad people from doing bad things to good Americans. The general's phone buzzed again. He checked it and cursed under his breath. Sergeant Major, we have movement. 3 vehicles just entered the Arlington area, and they're not following tourist patterns. We need to go. Understood, sir? Marcus turned to Murphy. I need to borrow your back office for a moment. Of course, anything you need. Marcus disappeared into the office and emerged less than a minute later looking completely transformed. Gone was the simple cemetery worker. In his place stood a warrior. He had somehow acquired tactical gear that Murphy swore hadn't been in his office moments before. A radio headset curved around his ear, and his movements had taken on the fluid economy of motion that marked elite soldiers. How did you? Brad started to ask. Preparation, Marcus replied simply. Always be ready for the job you're trained to do. General Morrison was already coordinating with someone on his phone. Falcon team is 5 minutes out. Viper team is establishing overwatch positions. Local PD has been notified but is maintaining distance per protocol. Sir, Marcus said, checking his own equipment. I recommend we treat this as a live exercise until proven otherwise. If they're conducting surveillance today, the actual attack could be imminent. Agreed. You'll have full tactical authority once we reach Arlington. The transformation in both men was remarkable. The polite, respectful conversation of moments before had been replaced by the crisp efficiency of military professionals preparing for combat. Brad and the other civilians watched in fascination as the general and the tomb guard coordinated what was clearly a well-rehearsed plan. "General," the elderly woman asked, "what can we do to help?" "Stay here, stay quiet, and trust that we know what we're doing," Morrison replied. "And remember, nothing you've heard today gets repeated until this situation is resolved." Marcus paused at the door. "Murphy, I may need to use your shop as a staging area later. Are you comfortable with that?" "For you? Absolutely. Whatever you need. Thank you." Marcus looked at Brad and his friends. "Gentlemen, I hope this experience has been educational. Real service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about being ready to do whatever needs to be done when your country calls." Brad stepped forward awkwardly. "Sergeant Major, I owe you an apology. A big one. I had no idea." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus replied. "But you might consider what you owe the men and women who died defending your right to speak freely. Honor their sacrifice by using that freedom wisely." As Marcus and the general prepared to leave, the shop's atmosphere was electric with tension and awe. The customers who had witnessed the transformation found themselves grappling with a new understanding of the hidden layers of security that protected their daily lives. "Marcus," Murphy called out as they reached the door. "Be careful out there." "Always am," Marcus replied. "But today might require being a little less careful than usual." With that, he and General Morrison stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. Through the shop windows, everyone could see them conferring briefly before climbing into separate vehicles. Morrison into a black SUV that had appeared from nowhere, and Marcus onto a motorcycle that seemed far too powerful for an elderly cemetery worker. As they drove away, Brad sank into a nearby chair. "I feel like I just got schooled by Captain America." "Close," Murphy said thoughtfully. "But Marcus is real, and thank God for that, because I have a feeling we're going to need him before this day is over." The shop remained unusually quiet for the next hour, as each person processed what they had witnessed. Outside, the normal rhythm of Saturday afternoon continued, but everyone inside now understood that beneath the surface of everyday life, guardians like Marcus Chen stood ready to protect everything they held dear. Marcus Chen's motorcycle purred quietly as he approached Arlington Cemetery, through the back entrance reserved for official personnel. His tactical headset crackled with updates from the various teams converging on the area. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, creating a patchwork of light and darkness that would either help or hinder what was about to unfold. "Falcon 1 to command," came a voice through his earpiece. "We have visual on 3 suspects conducting reconnaissance near the amphitheater. They appear to be timing guard rotations and noting security camera positions." "Acknowledged, Falcon 1, Marcus replied, his voice calm and professional. "Maintain observation but do not engage. I want to see their full operational pattern before we move." He parked his bike near the administration building and quickly surveyed the sacred grounds he had called home for the past 5 years. Every pathway, every tree, every sight line was burned into his memory. This intimate knowledge of the terrain would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. General Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system. "Viper team reports additional suspects approaching from the north entrance. Vehicle count now up to 5. This is bigger than initial intelligence suggested." Marcus felt the familiar calm that descended during high-stress operations. His heart rate actually slowed as his body and mind shifted into combat mode. "Copy that, General. I'm implementing Protocol 7. "Protocol 7? Came a voice Marcus didn't recognize. "What's Protocol 7? "Something the Sergeant Major developed specifically for defending Arlington," Morrison replied. "You're about to see why we call him the Ghost of the Guard." Marcus moved through the cemetery with the silent precision of a predator. His years of Special Forces training had never left him, and the familiar weight of tactical gear felt natural despite his age. But more than training, he carried something his enemies couldn't understand, the spiritual weight of protecting the dead who had trusted him with their eternal rest. "Falcon 2 to command. Suspects are moving toward the tomb. They're carrying equipment that looks like surveying gear, but the cases are too heavy for standard instruments." Explosives, Marcus confirmed. Probably shaped charges designed to damage the monument without destroying it completely. They want symbolic desecration, not obliteration. He reached his first vantage point, a maintenance shed that offered clear sight lines to 3 different approaches to the tomb. From here, he could see the suspects the teams had been tracking. They moved with military precision, but their tactics felt foreign. Efficient but lacking the subtle adaptations that American Special Forces developed through decades of varied combat experience. Command, this is Chen. I count 8 hostiles total. 3 primary teams with 1 overwatch position. They're using standard foreign military doctrine, probably Spetsnaz or similar training. Good but predictable. Predictable how? Asked General Morrison. They're treating this like a combat zone instead of a sacred space. They see objectives and obstacles, not history and honor. That's their weakness. Marcus activated a hidden panel on the shed wall, revealing an equipment cache he had personally installed and maintained. Inside were weapons and gear specifically chosen for this type of scenario. Close quarters combat in a sensitive environment where collateral damage was unacceptable. Falcon teams. This is Chen, I'm going active. Maintain perimeter but do not engage unless directly threatened. These are my guests and I'll handle the introductions personally. Roger that, Sergeant Major. Be advised, local news crews are starting to gather outside the main gate. This situation is about to go public. Marcus smiled grimly. Media attention was exactly what the attackers wanted, but it would also ensure that their failure was witnessed by the entire nation. Sometimes the best response to psychological warfare was to turn it against the aggressor. He moved toward the first team with the fluid stealth that had made him legendary in special operations circles. The suspects were focused on their equipment and timing, confident in their numerical superiority and element of surprise. They had no idea they were being hunted by someone who knew every inch of this ground and was personally motivated beyond anything they could understand. The first operative never saw Marcus coming. One moment he was adjusting his equipment, the next he was unconscious and zip-tied behind a maintenance building. His radio was quietly confiscated, giving Marcus access to their communication network. Team Alpha, report status, came a voice with a slight accent through the captured radio. Marcus keyed the mic, mimicking the unconscious operative's voice pattern. Alpha in position. Beginning final preparations that acknowledged. Proceed with Phase 2 in 10 minutes. Now Marcus had their timeline. 10 minutes to neutralize the remaining 7 hostiles before they could execute whatever Phase 2 entailed. For most people, this would be impossible odds. For Marcus Chen, it was just another day at the office. He moved toward the second team using their own captured communications to track their positions. These operatives were skilled, but they were fighting on his home ground with tactics he had spent years anticipating. More importantly, they were fighting someone who wasn't just defending a military installation. He was protecting the sacred rest of heroes. The second operative fell to a sleeper hold, applied with such precision that his teammate, only feet away, didn't notice until Marcus had already moved into position behind him as well. Within 3 minutes, the second team was neutralized without a shot fired or alarm raised. Team Alpha, Team Bravo, report, came the increasingly urgent voice through the radio. Marcus continued his impersonation, both teams in final position. Minor equipment issues, but proceeding on schedule. Good. Command element is moving to Overwatch position. Phase 2 commences in 6 minutes. 5 hostiles remaining, Marcus calculated. The Overwatch team would be the most dangerous. They would have better sight lines and communication with any external support. But they would also be the most confident, believing they controlled the situation. His radio crackled with updates from the perimeter teams. Chen, we have activity at the main gate. Armed security attempting to gain entry using falsified credentials. This operation is larger than we thought. Understood, Marcus replied, moving toward the third team. How much larger? Unknown, but they're trying to create multiple entry points. Whatever Phase 2 is, they want to ensure they can execute it regardless of opposition. Marcus reached the third team and realized they were positioning shaped charges at the base of the tomb itself. The sight filled him with cold fury. These weren't soldiers fighting for their country. They were vandals attempting to desecrate everything he held sacred. His approach this time was less subtle. The lead operative looked up just in time to see 73-year-old Marcus Chen moving with the deadly grace of a man half his age. The operative reached for his weapon but found himself on the ground with a dislocated shoulder before he could clear his holster. The second operative spun toward the commotion and found himself facing down the barrel of Marcus's sidearm. "I wouldn't," Marcus said quietly in perfect Russian. "Your friends are already sleeping. You can join them peacefully or I can make this difficult for you." The operative's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected American security forces, but this elderly tomb guard speaking fluent Russian, while moving like a special forces operator, was completely outside his mission briefing. "Who are you?" the operative asked in accented English. "I'm the man who's been waiting his entire career for someone like you to threaten his sacred duty," Marcus replied. "Now drop your weapons and lie face down, or discover what happens when you threaten the honored dead." The operative hesitated for a crucial second, and Marcus ended the debate with swift, decisive action. Both men were unconscious and secured within moments. "Command, this is Chen. 6 hostiles neutralized. Moving on Overwatch position now." "Outstanding work, Sergeant Major. Be advised, Phase 2 appears to involve a coordinated media event. They want to broadcast their attack live." Marcus smiled as he moved toward the final position. "Then let's make sure they broadcast something entirely different than what they planned." The Overwatch position was located in the old bell tower of the Memorial Chapel, giving the remaining operatives a commanding view of the entire cemetery. Marcus studied the structure from concealment, noting the tactical advantages and disadvantages of the position. The height gave them excellent sight lines, but it also trapped them with limited escape routes. His captured radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Command to all teams. Media units are in position. Commence Phase 2 immediately." Marcus keyed the radio one final time.
"Teams Alpha and Bravo ready."
"Beginning Phase 2 now. Acknowledged. Broadcast begins in 30 seconds. Make it memorable." Through his scope, Marcus could see news vans positioned outside the cemetery gates, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Whatever the attackers had planned, they intended the entire world to witness it. But instead of the propaganda victory they expected, they were about to broadcast the failure of their operation to a global audience. Marcus approached the chapel using a route he had planned years earlier for exactly this type of scenario. The building's historical significance meant it was equipped with security measures invisible to casual observers, but familiar to someone with his clearance level. Hidden handholds, reinforced access points, and silent alarm systems that had been installed during his security upgrades. As he climbed toward the bell tower, his earpiece brought updates from the perimeter teams. "Chen, we have confirmation that this is part of a larger coordinated attack. Similar operations are being attempted at the Marine Corps War Memorial and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, all attacks timed to coincide with live television coverage. Status on those locations?" Marcus asked quietly, pausing below the tower entrance. "Both neutralized successfully. Teams were waiting for them. Apparently someone has been preparing for this type of attack for years." Marcus smiled grimly. The someone they referred to was him. For 5 years he had studied potential threats and developed countermeasures for every conceivable attack scenario. What the enemy saw as scattered, vulnerable targets, Marcus had turned into an integrated defense network. He reached the tower entrance and could hear voices speaking in a mixture of Russian and Arabic above him. 3 operatives based on the distinct vocal patterns. One was clearly the team leader, coordinating with someone outside the cemetery via satellite phone. "Yes, the charges are in position. The American guards have been eliminated. When the broadcast begins, we will detonate and then eliminate any response forces. The psychological impact will be devastating." Marcus listened as they described their planned desecration of the tomb, their excitement at striking a blow against American morale, their certainty that this attack would inspire others around the world. What they didn't understand was that they had chosen to attack the one place on Earth where Marcus Chen would never, ever allow evil to triumph. "Command, this is Chen. 3 hostiles in the tower. They believe their ground teams are still operational, and that charges are still in place. I'm going to use that to our advantage." "How?" "Trust me, General. And make sure those news cameras are rolling." Marcus activated a device he had hoped never to use, a portable jammer that would temporarily disrupt the operative's communications, while allowing his own equipment to function normally. The technology was classified and expensive, but it would ensure that the tower team's final moments were broadcast exactly as he intended. He moved up the tower stairs with deadly silence. decades of training allowing him to navigate the ancient wooden steps without creating a single sound. As he reached the top level, he could see the three operatives through the partially open door. They were focused on their equipment and the view outside, confident that they controlled the situation. The team leader was speaking into his satellite phone. Media appears ready. Beginning countdown. In 10 seconds, the world will see that American sacred sites are not protected from those willing to sacrifice for the cause. Marcus stepped into the doorway, his weapon trained on the group. "The only sacrifice happening here today is yours," he said in fluent Russian. The three operatives spun toward him, but Marcus had positioned himself with the tactical advantage of surprise and superior positioning. The leader dropped his satellite phone, which clattered across the stone floor as all three men reached for their weapons. "I wouldn't recommend it," Marcus said calmly. "You're outgunned, outflanked, and about to be very disappointed." "Impossible," the leader snarled in accented English. "We eliminated the guards. The charges are set. You cannot stop what has already begun." "Actually, I can," Marcus replied, activating a remote device on his belt. Through the tower windows, all four men could see the areas where the shaped charges had been placed. Instead of explosions, there were small puffs of smoke as Marcus's countercharges neutralized the enemy explosives. "You see?" Marcus continued conversationally. "I've spent 5 years preparing for people exactly like you. Every charge you placed was detected and countered within minutes of installation. Every approach route you used was monitored and recorded. Every tactical decision you made was anticipated and prepared for." The operatives stared in disbelief as their carefully planned operation dissolved before their eyes. Through the windows, they could see their eliminated teammates being loaded into unmarked vehicles by American security forces. "But the media," the second operative stammered. "The world is watching." "Yes, they are," Marcus agreed. "And they're about to see something much more important than the destruction you planned. They're going to see American resolve in the price of threatening our sacred places." The leader made a desperate lunge for a backup detonator, but Marcus moved with speed that belied his age. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the operative and had him face down on the stone floor. The other two operatives found themselves in similar positions before they could react. "Command, this is Chen. Tower secured. All hostiles neutralized. The cemetery is safe." "Outstanding, Sergeant Major. The media is requesting interviews." Marcus looked down at the captured operatives, then out at the news cameras visible beyond the cemetery gates. "Tell them the tomb guard has nothing to add beyond our actions. The dead we protect speak for themselves through our service." As security teams arrived to collect the prisoners, Marcus remained in the tower for a moment, looking out over the cemetery he had sworn to protect. The afternoon sun was casting longer shadows now, and in a few hours, the evening guard would take his post at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The leader of the operatives, now secured with zip ties, looked up at Marcus with a mixture of hatred and confusion. "How?" he asked simply. "How did one old man defeat an entire operation?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Because you made the same mistake everyone makes. You saw an elderly man in a simple uniform and assumed that meant weakness. You forgot that America doesn't put its most dangerous guardians in the most obvious places." "You're just one man," the operative protested. "No," Marcus replied, helping the prisoner to his feet for transport. "I'm the representative of every American who ever wore the uniform, took the oath and meant it. You weren't fighting one old tomb guard. You were fighting the accumulated will and skill of everyone who came before me and everyone who will come after me." The operative fell silent, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what he had attempted and why it was doomed from the start. As the prisoners were led away, General Morrison's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. "Sergeant Major, I have the President on the line. He wants to speak with you personally." "With respect, sir, tell the President I'm honored, but I need to return to my post. The next guard rotation begins in 20 minutes and I need to ensure everything is ready." "Marcus, you just prevented an international incident and saved one of our most sacred monuments. Don't you think you've earned a break?" Marcus smiled as he began his descent from the tower. "General, with respect, the day I stop taking my duty seriously is the day they need to find a new tomb guard. Besides, after all this excitement, standing watch is going to feel wonderfully peaceful." 3 hours later, Marcus Chen stood at his familiar post beside the tomb of the unknown soldier, his posture as perfect as always despite the day's extraordinary events. The media circus outside the cemetery gates had grown to include international news crews. But within the sacred grounds, an ancient rhythm continued unchanged. His radio crackled softly with updates from General Morrison. "Sergeant Major, the President insists on meeting with you personally tomorrow. The Secretary of Defense wants a full briefing on your security protocols. The Director of the CIA is asking how you predicted this attack so accurately, and apparently the British Prime Minister called specifically to congratulate you." "Acknowledged, sir," Marcus replied quietly, never taking his eyes off the tomb. "I'll be available after my duty rotation ends." Back at Murphy's Gun Emporium, the atmosphere was electric with excitement and pride. Word of Marcus's actions had spread quickly through the community, and the shop had become an unofficial gathering place for people wanting to discuss what had happened. Brad Hutchins sat in the same chair he had occupied hours earlier, but his entire worldview had been fundamentally altered. "I can't believe I was mocking him," Brad said for the 10th time, shaking his head. "The man just saved one of the most important monuments in America, and I was calling him a glorified security guard." Murphy wiped down the counter, his movements reflecting his emotional state. "Marcus never said a word about what he really did. 5 years he's been coming in here and I thought I knew him. Turns out I didn't know anything." The elderly woman who had witnessed the morning's confrontation nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the point. Real heroes don't announce themselves. They just do what needs to be done when it needs to be done." Television screens throughout the shop displayed continuous coverage of the failed attack. News anchors struggled to explain how a complex terrorist operation, involving multiple teams and sophisticated equipment, had been single-handedly defeated by one 73-year-old cemetery guard. The operational security was perfect, a military analyst was, explaining to a CNN reporter. Whoever planned the counter-operation had anticipated every aspect of the attack and prepared specific responses. This level of tactical thinking suggests either extensive intelligence assets or someone with intimate knowledge of both Arlington Cemetery and asymmetric warfare tactics. Brad's friend, Mike, looked up from his phone. "The internet is going crazy." Someone posted security footage of Marcus moving through the cemetery. "I've never seen anything like it. He moves like he's 30 years younger." "Training," Murphy said simply. "Real training. The kind that becomes part of your DNA. Marcus didn't just learn tactics, he lived them for so long they became instinct." General Morrison appeared on one of the news channels for a carefully controlled interview. The reporter pressed him for details about Marcus's background and current role. "Sergeant Major Chen represents the very best of American military tradition," the general said diplomatically. "His service record speaks for itself, though much of it remains classified for obvious reasons. What I can tell you is that he has dedicated his life to protecting American ideals, and today's events demonstrate why we trust him with that responsibility." "But General," the reporter persisted, "how does a tomb guard develop the skills necessary to defeat a coordinated terrorist attack?" Morrison smiled. "You're asking the wrong question. The right question is, how does America produce individuals like Sergeant Major Chen? The answer is that we take ordinary people with extraordinary character and give them the training, responsibility, and motivation to become guardians of everything we hold sacred." Back at Arlington, Marcus completed his ceremonial inspection of the tomb and began the precise 21-step walk that had continued uninterrupted for 75 years. Each step was measured, each pause exactly timed, each movement a tribute to the unknown soldiers who rested beneath the marble. Tourists gathered beyond the chain barriers, many of them having come specifically because of the day's events. They watched with new appreciation as Marcus performed his duty, understanding now that they were witnessing something far more significant than a ceremonial changing of the guard. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, is that the man who stopped the bad guys?" "Yes, honey," she replied softly. "That's him." "He doesn't look scary," the boy observed. "The most dangerous guardians rarely do," his mother explained. "They look like teachers and shopkeepers and yes, even tomb guards. But they're always ready to protect the things that matter." At Murphy's shop, a different kind of education was taking place. Brad had spent the afternoon researching Marcus's military decorations and the requirements for serving as a tomb guard. What he discovered had left him humbled and ashamed of his earlier behavior. Do you know what it takes to qualify for the Tomb Guard? Brad asked the assembled group. Physical fitness standards that would challenge men half his age. Memorization of the details of every Medal of Honor recipient buried at Arlington. That's over 400 people. Perfect knowledge of military customs and courtesies. And psychological evaluations to ensure absolute mental stability under pressure. And that's just the beginning, Murphy added. Marcus told me once that guards practice their movements for months before they're allowed near the tomb. Every step, every gesture, every expression has to be perfect. They're representing every American who ever died in service to their country. The shop's bell chimed as General Morrison entered, still in his dress uniform but looking considerably more relaxed than he had hours earlier. The conversations died as everyone turned to face him. "General," Murphy said respectfully, "honor to have you in my shop." "The honor is mine," Morrison replied. "I wanted to speak with the people who witnessed Sergeant Major Chen's transformation this morning. Your discretion and respect today contributed to the success of the operation." Brad stood awkwardly. "General, I owe you and Sergeant Major Chen an apology. I behaved disgracefully." Morrison studied the younger man carefully. "What did you learn from today?" "That I know nothing about real service," Brad replied honestly. "That I've been taking my freedom for granted. That heroes don't always look like what you expect them to look like." "Good," Morrison nodded. "Those are important lessons. But the most important lesson is this. Sergeant Major Chen isn't unique because he's superhuman. He's unique because he chose to dedicate his life to something larger than himself. That choice is available to every American." "You mean anyone could do what he did?" asked another customer. "Anyone could make the commitment he made," Morrison clarified. "The skills come from training and experience. The dedication comes from character. America needs more people willing to make that choice, in military service and civilian life." The general's phone buzzed with what was clearly an urgent message. "I'm afraid duty calls again. But before I go, I want you all to know that the President will be visiting Arlington tomorrow to personally thank Sergeant Major Chen. The ceremony will be broadcast nationally. Will Marcus be comfortable with that?" Murphy asked, knowing his customer's preference for quiet service. Morrison smiled. "He'll hate every minute of it, but he'll endure it because he understands that sometimes accepting recognition serves a larger purpose. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to let the living see what true service looks like." As the general left, the shop gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though the conversations remained focused on the day's events. Outside, the sun was setting over Arlington Cemetery, where Marcus Chen continued his vigil, protecting the honored dead as he had sworn to do, as guardians before him had done, and as guardians after him would continue to do. The failed attack had intended to strike at the heart of American morale. Instead, it had revealed the unshakable foundation of American resolve. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they believed in something worth protecting. 1 week later, Marcus Chen stood in Murphy's Gun Emporium examining the same M1 Garand he had been looking at when his world changed. The presidential ceremony had come and gone. The media attention had finally died down and life had returned to something approaching normal. But not quite. The shop was busier than usual, filled with visitors who had come specifically, hoping to meet the man they were now calling the Guardian of Arlington. Marcus found their attention uncomfortable but endured it with the same patient dignity he brought to all aspects of his service. "Sergeant Major," called out a young woman in army fatigues, who had been quietly observing from across the shop. "I just wanted to thank you. I'm being deployed next month, and knowing that people like you are protecting what we're fighting for, it means everything." Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening. "What's your name, soldier?" "Private First Class Rodriguez, sir." "Second Airborne." "All airborne," Marcus replied with a slight smile, using the traditional greeting. "Private Rodriguez, you don't need to thank me. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Every generation of Americans has faced its tests. Your generation is facing yours with the same courage as those who came before." The young soldier straightened with pride, and Marcus noticed that several other customers were listening intently to their conversation. Among them was Brad Hutchins, who had become a regular visitor to the shop since the events of the previous week. "Marcus," Brad said as Private Rodriguez moved on to complete her purchases, "can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" "Of course." During that presidential ceremony when the president asked you what Americans should learn from what happened, you said something I can't stop thinking about. You said that the real victory wasn't stopping the attack. It was proving that evil can never truly touch what matters most. What did you mean? Marcus set down the rifle he had been examining and turned to face Brad fully. Those terrorists wanted to attack our symbols because they thought destroying symbols would destroy our spirit. But they made a fundamental mistake. They thought the tomb of the unknown soldier was important because of the marble and the ceremony. It's not, asked another customer, an elderly veteran who had been quietly listening. The monument is just stone, Marcus replied. What makes it sacred is what it represents. The willingness of ordinary Americans to sacrifice everything for their fellow citizens. You can't destroy that with explosives because it lives in the hearts of people like Private Rodriguez, and you, and everyone who chooses to serve something larger than themselves. Murphy nodded thoughtfully. So by failing to damage the physical monument, they proved they could never damage what it really stands for. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Evil can threaten symbols, but it cannot touch the ideals those symbols represent, as long as people are willing to defend them. The shop's bell chimed as General Morrison entered, now dressed in civilian clothes. He had taken to stopping by the shop whenever his schedule permitted, drawn by the unique combination of military history and honest conversation that seemed to flourish there. Afternoon, everyone, Morrison said, nodding to the assembled group. Marcus, I have news from Washington. Sir, the intelligence agencies have completed their analysis of the captured operatives and their equipment. This attack was part of a much larger coordinated effort targeting American military symbols worldwide. Similar attempts were planned against the Marine Corps Memorial in Tripoli, the American Cemetery in Normandy, and the USS Arizona Memorial. Were they successful? Brad asked with concern. Morrison smiled. Not a single attack succeeded. It turns out that America has been quietly preparing for this type of asymmetric warfare for years. People like Sergeant Major Chen have been developing security protocols and training programs that our enemies never anticipated. You mean there are others like Marcus? Asked Private Rodriguez. Thousands, Morrison confirmed. Military and civilian personnel who understand that protecting American ideals requires more than just conventional military strength. It requires people who are willing to stand guard over the things that define us as a nation. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Morrison continued. The President asked me to inform you that your security protocols are being implemented at sensitive sites worldwide. Your methodology for anticipating and countering symbolic attacks is becoming standard doctrine. I'm honored. Sir, but I was just doing my job. That's exactly why you're so effective, Morrison replied. You never think of yourself as special, even though your actions prove otherwise. Brad had been working up the courage to speak and finally found his voice. Sergeant Major, I've been thinking about what you said about serving something larger than yourself. I want to apply to join the Honor Guard. The shop fell silent. Brad was in his early 30s, overweight, and had no military experience. Under normal circumstances, such a request would be politely dismissed. Marcus studied him carefully. Why? Because I spent my whole life thinking I was patriotic because I owned guns and complained about politicians. But watching you made me realize that real patriotism requires sacrifice, not just opinions. I want to do something that matters. The Honor Guard requires military service first, Marcus said gently. But there are other ways to serve. The cemetery needs volunteers for maintenance, ceremony coordination, and visitor education. The job doesn't determine the value of the service. The commitment does. Brad's face lit up with possibility. You mean I could help protect Arlington? If you're serious about service, there are always opportunities. But understand that real service means showing up every day, doing what's needed whether anyone notices or not, and putting the mission before your personal comfort. I understand, Brad said, and for the first time, Marcus believed he actually did. Private Rodriguez approached Marcus again as she prepared to leave. Sergeant Major, I know this might sound strange, but could you give me some advice for deployment? Marcus considered her question seriously. Remember why you're serving. When things get difficult, and they will, remember that you're part of an unbroken chain of Americans who chose to stand between evil and innocence. That connection to something larger than yourself will give you strength when nothing else can. Thank you, sir. That helps. As the afternoon wore on, the conversations in the shop gradually returned to normal topics. hunting, gun maintenance, military history. But there was an underlying current of something different, a shared understanding that they had all been part of something significant. Murphy watched Marcus examining the M1 Garand again, and finally asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Marcus, you look at that rifle every week, but you never buy it." "Why?" Marcus smiled. "Because some things are more valuable when you don't possess them. That rifle represents my first taste of military service when I was young and thought I understood what courage meant. Looking at it reminds me how much I've learned since then and how much I still have to learn." "You're not thinking of retiring, are you?" Murphy asked with concern. "From the Tomb Guard? Eventually, yes. My body won't maintain these standards forever. But from service?" Marcus shook his head. "Service isn't a job you retire from. It's a way of life. When I can no longer guard the tomb, I'll find other ways to serve." General Morrison stood to leave but paused at the door. "Marcus, one final question. During the attack, when you were facing down those operatives in the bell tower, what were you thinking?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I was thinking about every American who ever stood a post, from sentries at Valley Forge to guards at remote outposts in Afghanistan. I was thinking about how they faced their tests with courage and dignity. And I was thinking that I had better not be the one to break that chain of honor. And that," Morrison said to the assembled group, "is why America produces people like Sergeant Major Chen. Not because we're inherently superior to other nations, but because we've created a culture that celebrates service, honors sacrifice, and believes that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they're fighting for something worth preserving." As evening approached and the shop began to empty, Marcus prepared to leave for his evening shift at Arlington. Brad approached him one final time. "Sergeant Major, I just wanted you to know that meeting you changed my life. I'm going to apply for the volunteer positions at Arlington tomorrow." Marcus shook the younger man's hand. "Brad, the measure of a man isn't where he starts, it's how he chooses to grow. You've shown real growth this week. That gives me hope for the future." "Hope?" "Yes, every generation faces the choice between selfishness and service. As long as people like you are willing to choose service, America will continue to be the kind of nation worth defending." As Marcus left for Arlington Cemetery, the setting sun cast long shadows through the shop windows. Murphy began closing up, reflecting on how one seemingly ordinary Saturday had revealed the extraordinary people who walk among us every day, protecting everything we hold dear. Outside, Marcus Chen rode his motorcycle toward Arlington, where he would stand guard over the honored dead as he had sworn to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of American resolve. But tonight, the tomb of the unknown soldier would be protected by a guardian who understood that some